right, so here we are with part 2 of dealing with image sequences, mostly centered around DaVinci Resolve. Although in this video, we're not going to be in DaVinci Resolve at all. This is all about, in the first video, we exported an image sequence instead of a video file. We exported it one frame at a time. So in this video, we're going to talk about what are some of the things that you could do to these. And you know, why would you even bother doing this? So let's start off by just opening up one of the frames in our image editing software. I use PaintShop Pro. You probably use Photoshop, or there's of course other options. There's similarities to these platforms. This just happens to be the platform that I know. So this is one frame of our film here. And perhaps what we might want to do is apply some special effects to this. So for example, one might do find all the edges, which creates this almost a pencil drawn type effect. Another one might be something like maybe brush strokes, where it almost gives it kind of a painted feel. Now these effects are interesting on single images, but it's more interesting when these are moving images, right? But this is just giving an example of what we could do to kind of really mess with a frame in a way and with a level of quality that it's pretty tough to achieve with plugins. All right. The look that we're doing for the purposes of this test involves applying two different filters. One is edge effects and enhance more. All right. So that kind of, it outlines, let's just show it back and forth. So that's the way it looked before. It's kind of hazy. And this is giving the edges a little bit more definition. Okay? And then the second effect that we're going to apply on this one, and of course you'll fool around and pick the ones that you want for your thing. But we're going to use something in PaintShop Pro that's called the Time Machine. And we're going to choose early color. So you can already kind of see what that does to it. It washes things out a little bit, but it still maintains some crispness. All right. So that is the effect that we want to apply to all of our frames here. Now doing that one frame at a time, if you only have 24 frames to do it to, then maybe that's the best way to do it. It's just one frame at a time, do what you just saw me do. But honestly, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to automate this a little bit. We're going to do that through a scripting feature in here where we record our actions. It's basically like making a macro of this, right? So if we say start recording, and then we're going to go first to effects, edge effects, enhance more, and then effects, photo effects, time machine. And fortunately, it's going to remember my settings from when I used it last. And we click OK. Now we go down here under script and we say save recording. And we're just going to name this cartoony test. The only reason that matters is we got to look it up a little bit later. Okay. Now we're not going to bother saving the changes to this image. We're just going to close the image. Okay. So we've saved that script. Now we can go to File, Batch Process. We're going to clear out the sample image that it has in here. We're going to click Add, and we're going to find our images here. And I'm going to do a shift click to select them all. And we click Select. Now this will take a moment sometimes to load, depending on how many you're loading at once. It'll take a moment. It's basically generating thumbnails for the purposes of this thing and getting the list populated. So once the list of images is populated with thumbnails like that, you're ready to click Next. Now for batch actions, there's a few things that could be done here. Like if you needed to batch resize, that's handy sometimes. We don't need to do that in this case. We're going to go to Script, and then we're going to look for, what did we name it? Cartoony test. Now you could have multiple scripts here that you could run if you wanted to. We're only going to need to run this one. We click Apply, and now it's just confirming these are the batch actions that we're going to run on the list of photos that we loaded up. So we click Next. Then we're going to choose our destination folder. I'm going to choose PSP for PaintShop Pro. You tell it how you want to name the files and how you want to deal with naming conflicts. There shouldn't be any naming conflicts because this folder we're saving to is empty. But if you were concerned about that, you can alter this behavior so that you don't accidentally, you definitely don't want to render these to the same folder the originals are in, or you'll risk losing something. So always choose a new folder. You can choose the file format. We're going to stick with good old PNG, and we're just going to click Start. And now it's going to go through, and what it's doing in the background is it's loading each one of those images, 66 of them, I guess it was, loading all of those and running those 2 filters and then saving the result in the place that we specified. So if you've got hundreds or thousands of frames to do this on, plan on this taking a little bit of time. For our little bitty clip here, it's fairly fast. Which filters you choose matters as well. Like some filters take a lot longer to apply to the image. The size of your image that you're applying filters to matters a lot in terms of time. You just gotta budget accordingly. There's a film that at the time this video will come out has not yet been released, but that I worked on with this, where it was about a 5-minute video and every single frame was touched in some way by this type of process. Yeah, it took hours to do all of it. It's something you want to budget your time accordingly, and the computer's going to be a little bit tied up when running this process, okay? But we're done here. So now if we open up that PSP folder, we can actually see some thumbnails, and we're just going to pick one at random and see what it looks like. And you see that look has been applied to every frame in the video. Okay? So that's one possibility. Now I'm going to show you a second one using a completely different program so you can see what that looks like. All right, so this is a program called Vector Magic. Vector Magic first came around, it's got to be close to 20 years ago now. And it started off as, I believe it was developed at Stanford University. It was a project of, I think, a combination of students and faculty there. And it was available as like a web service, fairly cheap, where you could upload an image, like a picture, and the service would vectorize it for you. Basically like Adobe Illustrator, you know, where it's a vector image instead of a raster image. And then eventually they produced and released a desktop version of that software, which I picked up. It was a few $100. I don't know if it's still available now, to be honest. When I went to try and visit their website, because I thought maybe I'd pull it up for you here, today their website is down. But I've seen some search references to like Reddit threads and stuff like that, people talking about it as recently as a couple years ago. So I don't know if maybe it's just gone abandonware or what, but I'll show you how it works. And if you can get your hands on a copy, it's a pretty interesting program. Now most people would use it because they want to work with vector images, right? But we're going to use it as a stylistic thing. So the way that I would recommend doing this is to bring in just one image, one of your frames first, and then walk through the wizard here to kind of confirm how you want to do the settings. Okay? The basic is I think the most interesting, the easiest to work with. So it asks you what type of image. Photograph is for this type of thing is the most appropriate selection there. I think we get the best result for this type of render using high fidelity, which is what I just chose there. It's going to mean more detail. It's going to mean larger files, but it's worth it. And then you want to specify unlimited colors. Now it's going to go through and create a vectorized version, a preview of the vectorized version of this. And so you can get an idea of what this does stylistically. It's very unique looking. It's very interesting. It's not just a matter of if you just did a bit rate or color reduction on the image, it wouldn't be the same. There's no filters that I know of inside PaintShop Pro that can actually do this because it's using an algorithm to convert the raster image into a vector image. And that means that there are these very clearly defined patches of color, and there's not really any more gradient between those sections. The degree to which it will preserve detail here is this detail level selection that we made. And again, I'm just choosing high for this. You should experiment with other ones as well to see what those look like. Like if we tried medium real quick, it's going to re-render the preview. See how we lost some detail there? Maybe that's the look that you want, right? Maybe that makes the most sense. But we're going to stick with high. Okay, so we've confirmed now that is the look that we want to apply to all the frames. So we're going to go back to the start page of this program, and we're going to choose batch processing. This is a very similar beginning step to what we just did in PaintShop Pro. We're going to select all our images here, and we're going to drag them in. It's going to make thumbnails for all of them, and then we can click Next. Now, there are some settings here that are very important, and here's the ones that I'm using for the purposes of this test. Obviously, you should feel free to experiment with these to get to see what kind of result you can get. Okay, resize policy. I'm telling it to avoid if possible. Basically, I don't want it adjusting the size of these frames or elements within the frames. I want it to honor the original image as much as possible. Okay, image type, if you remember from when we did our test, photograph. Image quality, we're going to change this to medium, or to high, excuse me. Color mode, unlimited colors. That's what we're choosing. You could specify a palette and really get a vectorized look that's interesting. You know, it depends, a lot of it depends on the look of your source material, how well that's going to work. Picking a very limited palette for an image that has this much gradient in the original, not going to be the look that I want. But depending on how you've rendered, it may make more sense to do that. And then transparency. Even though we know we don't have any transparency in these PNG images, we don't have any alpha channel, but I just keep it at preserved transparency by default. That's not going to add anything to the images. It's just going to honor what's in them. And that's the general theme. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, okay? Because the batch processor, okay, in Vector Magic, when you do a single image and render it to the point that we saw a little bit earlier, you actually have an option right then and there to export straight to a rasterized image. So a bitmap or PNG, it lets you go straight to that when you're doing a single image. The batch processor only lets you choose vector formats, which is unfortunate, but you need to understand, you know, we're using this software for a purpose that it was not designed for. So there's going to be a little bit of workaround involved. So I've experimented with this a bit. Let's first choose our destination folder. We've got it. And the export formats available are AI and EPS, which are both, they're known vector formats. There's DXF, EMF, PDF, and SVG. Experiment with this and see what, a lot of this depends on what other software you have readily available. For my purposes, dealing with PaintShop Pro, after experimenting with this, PDF, believe it or not, as weird as that seems, PDF is going to be the best format. Now, this is an actual vectorized image, but it'll be stored, it'll be packaged in a PDF file for each frame, okay? So, export options, we can leave all those at default, but those are worth experimenting with depending on how you're, what look you're going for. And then we're just going to click Next. And now it's going to go through just like we saw do in PaintShop Pro, and it's going to export, it's going to process and then save these images one at a time. And we told it to do so in our folder here named VM for Vector Magic. So we're going to go in that folder and just watch it populate. Okay. Quite a bit more processing involved per frame. And you see that the image size, or the file size of a single frame here is, about 2.4 megs, and the original was 2.0 for frame 1. So it's in some cases gaining a little bit of file size, but that's good if it's at least as good a file size as the originals. It's a good thing because that generally is going to mean, okay, it's preserving a good amount of detail. Vector images are generally much more efficient than raster images, generally. But the more detail that's involved, the more that those file sizes can go up significantly. So we're going to let this run here. It's going to take a few minutes, And then as the final step today, I'll show you, okay, now we've got PDFs. How in the world do we get those usable again to where we can prepare for video number 3, which is going to be taking your processed image sequence and making it a video again. So hang in there for just a moment. All right, so those are all rendered now. So let's begin by, we'll just go ahead and close Vector Magic, and let's bring in just one of these, just because basically what we want to do is batch, not just rename, but batch transform these into PNG file frames. But we want to just take a look real quick here because this is a vector file. So if we just drag one of these into PaintShop Pro, this is what we see. It basically, by default, it's going to open this PDF. This program, PaintShop Pro, doesn't actually deal with like Adobe Illustrator or vector files. So when you bring in a vector file, it wants to convert it to a raster image for you to then work with. And the default resolution is 72 dpi. So here's what that ends up looking like. Okay. And it is 1920 by 1080. Okay. So we may be okay here. On some previous tests that I did, it was a little bit lower resolution and we had to change it, but I think we may be okay. So we're going to go into File, Batch Process. This screen may look familiar from when we visited this previously, and we are going to take all of these PDFs and, well, actually I can't load them that way. I'm going to do it like this. Test VM, and let's just take all of those and open them up. This will take just a moment. Okay, so we've got all the thumbnails loaded. So we go to Next, Batch Actions, and we actually don't need to do anything here. I think they're going to be just fine. We're just going to go straight over to the output settings, and here is where we're going to specify a folder. We'll just put them in the same folder there, the VM folder, and we want to have it where it won't accidentally overwrite anything, but we're going to choose the file type of PNG. So if we click Start, it's going to go through and process those. And basically it's opening each one of those and then just saving it as a PNG file. So let's just take one of these. We'll just grab one at random and let's open it back up in our image editor here. And let's just make sure, okay, it is a PNG and it is 1920 by 1080. That's great. Notice something interesting here. Notice how small these files are. This one's only 200, the file we just opened is only 211 kilobytes. Let's look at the first one. This very first frame in the current render we did, which was bring it into Vector Magic and then back to PNG again. 175 kilobytes. If we go over here and look at the PaintShop Pro ones, the first frame weighs almost 5 meg. Why is that? Well, Vector Magic, by turning these into vector images, it's one of the most highly optimized ways of opening the image because of the reduction of colors, even though it doesn't look terribly reduced unless you zoom in. But this optimization here of colors makes these images just take up less space. Isn't that weird? It's kind of a form of compression, but this is a compression based around this vector algorithm. Just thought that was interesting. All right, so now we have, let's do this. I probably wasn't the best idea in the world to render all of these into one folder. So just to prevent future confusion, we're going to create a folder in here called PDF, and we're going to create another folder in here called PNG. And then we're just going to separate these. That's going to make things easier in the next step, in the next video, when we go to reassemble these into an actual video. And I'll just keep them out of the way. Okay, so now we have our original frames here, which we technically don't need anymore. And we've got one version that we ran through PaintShop Pro to alter using the batch scripting. And we've got this other one that we ran first through Vector Magic to make it a PDF vector file. And then we brought that into PaintShop Pro through batch processing to convert it back. So the visual changes have been realized now as it's brought over here into there. So the final step is, how do we get this usable as a video again? That's actually a pretty quick step compared to the ones we've done so far. We'll cover that in the next video. We'll see you then.